Welcome to Brazen Education with Educator Barnes, a podcast with a focus on speaking your truth, being transparent to help others, and having no shame about it. Because we can't move forward until the truth is known.
Welcome back to Brazen Education. This is our 75th episode, so I'm super excited about that. And I have a special guest, Akil Parker. If that name sounds familiar, you would be correct. He was here last year, and we had an opportunity to talk to him about math. He is the man, the genius behind all this math. He's a Philly educator, and he's out here educating everyone, kids, parents, community members, about getting better at math and the importance of math in the community. So I wanted to definitely have him back. So Akil, thanks for being back here on our 75th episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Thanks for having me back. You've been putting in a lot of work. You're up to 75 episodes. That's no small feat.
Well, thanks. Trying to keep the education conversation going, especially on topics where I feel needs a lot more attention. And math is definitely one of those topics. And one of the things that you and I talked about on the last episode is the fact that there's been this all of a sudden reckoning with literacy and how everyone's like, we need to get kids to read. And we talked a little bit about how that same reckoning needs to happen with math. But what we didn't talk about is that connection between math and literacy and how they're not these two opposing camps out here on the fringes. So talk to us a little bit about math and literacy and the message that you have for our audience today.
Right. So, well, one of the things I hear often that I try to push back on is, this kind of feeling that a lot of people have in terms of whether they are math people or reading people. And one of the things that I always tell my students, and I just tell people in general conversation, is that in order to be a quote unquote math person, you need to be a reading person. Because in order to actually solve math problems, you need to know how to read math problems and decode math problems and understand and comprehend math problems before you even get to the point to even be able to do any calculations or computations. So you got to welcome the reading, in order to be successful at mathematics. And then I would say on the reading side of it, a lot of the same methods and approaches that, we utilize in mathematics instruction and in calculations, of math problems and solving math problems, you actually apply when you're decoding words and comprehending words anyway. One thing that I think about is when we think about prefixes, right? I don't know the appropriate term, but I'm thinking like negative prefixes like un and like miss, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to make meaning of those words in the English language, it's the same as if you were to multiply -1 by a number. Because when you multiply -1 by a number, you're in fact creating a negative number, or the opposite, not necessarily a negative, but the opposite of whatever that number already was. So if you think of the root word as the number, and then that prefix is a negative prefix, like unhappy, right? As an example, how do we know what the word unhappy means? Because we know what happy means, and then the prefix un basically means you're the opposite of happy, right? So the prefix un can be thought of as like a -1 multiplied by the root word happy, which could represent a number. So that same concept is really applied. Like if you're reading something and trying to understand the English language, or you're using mathematics. And there's just like so many examples where there's like this overlap in terms of like English, ELA and mathematics. I can remember being in 7th grade and when we were in English class and we started diagramming sentences. And as I learned about diagramming sentences and the different parts of speech, and then like how to like identify this and how to write the little diagrams and whatnot, I realized once I started to get the hang of it that I really liked it. And then I was thinking to myself, like, man, why do I like this so much? And then I realized that because I liked math, I liked algebra. I was taking algebra 1 simultaneously in 7th grade. And I was like, this is just like algebra. This is all we doing. So it's like it's an algebra diagramming sentences for me was applying an algebraic approach to the English language. And it just made sense, similar to like even like I took Latin in 7th grade, and we had to conjugate verbs in Latin, and the different declensions and the different verb tenses and all that. It was all algebraic to me. It was like there was a formula like for each thing in order to do it correctly. So there's like just a lot of overlap in terms of mathematics and literacy, algebra and literacy, And I think we should, have more conversations about that. And because then I think what'll happen is, like, so when students, when they go to math class, when they're learning math, they can be thinking, oh, this is the same thing that we do in English class or in language arts class. And then when they go to English class or language arts class, and they're like, oh, this is the same thing we do in algebra class. So then what we're doing is, like, we are essentially blurring the lines, and decompartmentalizing the education, the formal education. And actually, we're getting there's more reinforcement when you do it that way, instead of students thinking, oh, this is math class, and this is what we're doing over here for these 60 minutes or 45 minutes or however long the class period is. And then the bell rings, and then I go to English class, and we're doing this over here. And then we're kind of, in some way, we're led to believe, or the students are led to believe, that this class has nothing to do with that other class. And that just, like, it creates more work anyway. Because instead of if we were to instead say, well, let's think about the similarities, and let's get interdisciplinary and get more cross curricular with just our approaches, and even just the conversation, even if it's not even formally done in terms of a curriculum that you're using as a teacher or what your school is using. Just have the conversation, just like say that to the students, like, listen, like I just said about, like, when we're trying to understand what this word means, and we're saying, oh, this prefix, like when somebody say, oh, I'm super excited, like, how you know what that means? Like, super is like a number. Like, excited is already like a number. Like, let's say excited was like 20, right? Because you feel real good about something, right? You ecstatic, you enthusiastic and all that. You excited, but then you say, oh, I'm super excited though. So take my excitement, multiply that by 10, right? So now I'm on 200 now, because I'm like 10 times 20. That's 200. So just little things like that, English teachers can say to their students, math teachers can say to their students, and say, listen, like, we just did 10 times 20. That's just like the word super excited. Super can represent a number. The word excited can represent a number. And it's really the same concept. So I think we got to, like, really lean into those types of things in order to create more understanding, with our young people and the
No, I
parents too.
think that's super important, because when I think about schools, when they do like cross curricular work, math and English is never put together. You normally have English working with social studies, and you normally have math working with science, and English and math never comes together. But there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of things that we have to teach because in English you're teaching all the words, you're teaching all the roots and all the stems. You're doing diagramming, which some people have gone away from grammar, which that's probably a whole other podcast or a whole other time. But diagramming sentences to me is like math process standards, because a lot of times parents are like, this new math, why they got to understand stuff, they just didn't know how to do it. But when kids understand diagramming sentences, and they understand all the parts of speech and how a sentence comes together like a formula, then they can understand how to write better. And so that was like how I compared those two things, because unfortunately we've gone away from some grammar instruction, gone away from some spelling instruction, gone away from some diagramming of sentences, because it's like, well, we just need comprehension, phonics, which is great, but that intersectionality. And the other thing, there's a lot of root words that we teach kids that are words that show up in math class. So if you're reading your math book and you haven't learned those, but sometimes if you're an English teacher and I was at a school where we had like this word roots book, and we had a number of roots that we got through. Sometimes people were skipping things. So you may skip the ones that are mostly math, because you're like, I don't got time for that. But if the English and math teachers were together, working together, the math teacher's like, hey, no, I need you to actually be reinforcing what those words are. Because on the other hand, sometimes math teachers don't give vocabulary instruction. So they may not have the professional development of how to teach a vocabulary word in a way that it sticks. So I do think if there are administrators listening, they need to consider how can they provide time in the school schedule, because people already got a lot of things to do outside of school, where is that time for those two content areas to overlap, and teachers can like share knowledge, because teachers should be definitely learning from each other. So it is summertime, Akil, and there are some people out here that are just like, I've seen so many reels, and to a certain extent, like, I get it. Your kids are home, like, you 100% responsible. You may be tired, you may be worn out, but some parents are just straight up checked out. And so there sometimes seems to be this dichotomy of, should kids be doing math facts over the summer? Should they be reading books over the summer? How do you see what kids are doing during the summer, overlapping between math and literacy? And what suggestions do you have for parents about what they should actually be doing this summer with their kids, to make sure that they're staying engaged while letting, kids be kids and having some outdoor time and, running around and whatnot?
I think kids should be doing everything this summer, you know. But I think what has to happen, and as a community, what we have to do a better job of, and this is why I'm trying to create the resources that I create and market them to the community, is we have to be able to, as educators, we have to be able to meet people where they are and
Mm.
create, meaningful ways where people can do the things that they're already doing, but then those things that they're already doing can become organic teachable moments. So this is why, like, I published my book that came out a year ago, How to Use All This Math Volume 1, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to meet you, where you are. Like, let's say you're running errands with your children and y'all are driving in the car. And I'm like, okay, so there's a chapter called License Plate Games, where I'm like, okay, have your child look at the numbers on the license plate of the car in front of y'all, and just use those numbers to practice addition facts, practice subtraction facts, practice multiplication facts, practice division facts, find the greatest common factor out of those numbers, find the least common multiple out of some of those numbers. Even if there are 4 digits on the license plate on the car in front of you, make two-digit numbers, do some subtraction, and develop those mental math skills. Those are like the small things that to some people might seem insignificant, but imagine all those car rides, all throughout the summer and then during the school year too, where they're practicing math, whereas they otherwise wouldn't be practicing math. That's extra practice. It's like just like with sports, getting your reps in. You know, like developing math skills is a lot like developing your skills as an athlete. You got to get the practice in, and a lot of times there are a lot of opportunities that are all around us, but you might not see it like unless you're like immersed in math. Like I'm a person, I'm immersed in math, so I see potential math problems all around me. You know, I'm like the little white boy on the Sixth Sense, like talking about I see dead people. Like I don't see dead people, but I see math problems right all around me. So what I do is like I document these things and I give them to the community. And a lot of those examples are in my book, How to Use All This Math, Volume 1. And then Volume 2 is coming out at the end of the summer. So, and then some things I just post on my Instagram, on the All This Math Instagram, or just on TikTok. Well, I need to start using TikTok more. My daughter told me that I got to go to TikTok because that's where the young people are.
That's
But
what I
some
heard
stuff,
too.
some stuff I put on Facebook, just so like parents can say, "Oh, man, I never thought about that." Like, yeah, you could do that. Just small things like whether you cooking. When your child goes into the kitchen, people always complain like, "Okay, the kids are home for the summer. They in the kitchen all day long, eating snacks all day long. Like, never stop eating." So I'm like, all right, if you want to grab some chips, on every food package container,
Mm.
the weight is listed, right? There's so like a food package container, and this is some other programming that I'm developing that I'm gonna put out there to the people. Um, is rich with possibilities of possible math examples. Just the weight itself, right? Bag of Doritos might be, the small bag. You buy the big box, of snacks or whatever with the Cheetos, and I call this valuable junk food, right? Because a lot of us we eat junk food. Like I eat junk food. I know better. I know I shouldn't be eating that stuff, but I lack discipline sometimes, and I like it. I like how it tastes, right? So I call it valuable junk food because the way to make the junk food valuable is like, all right, if we're gonna eat this junk food, let's look at this container and look at this packaging, and at least we're gonna practice some math with these numbers that's on here, right? So the bag of Doritos, 1 ounce, 28 grams. Then you can ask as a parent, you can ask your child, all right, well, tell me how many grams would 2 ounces be? How many
Mm.
ounces would 45 grams be? And there's a simple mathematical or algebraic equation you can do to set that up and just figure that out. And then once your child, like, the first time it might be difficult, the second time it might be difficult, the third time they may start to get the hang of it. But then when that becomes, part of their like arsenal and battery of knowledge, how to do conversions between ounces and grams just easily. And then, so then it becomes an issue of, oh, okay, well, wow, if I can do the conversion between ounces and grams, I might be able to do the conversions between kilograms and pounds because it's the same methodology, right? But it's different units, but it's the same methodology. But I started doing it at home when in a safe space that was comfortable. It wasn't no test involved. It wasn't no standardized test involved. It wasn't no pressure. I wanted a snack. And maybe my mom was like, hold up, before you get that snack, you got to tell me how many ounces is 52 grams, or how many ounces is 98 grams or whatever. Like, how bad do you want that snack? And then you showed them the math, and then or the basic algebra involved in that. And then the beauty of it is, when they go to school eventually, right? That's whether it's the next year or a couple years later, and the teacher's like, "Oh, this is the objective for today. We're gonna do unit conversions with blah blah blah," and then you sitting there like, "Whoa, we've been doing this." Like, so it's like then the math becomes something it becomes more similar to reading, whereas while students do have anxiety around reading, a lot of students do. I don't think as many students have anxiety around reading as they do around math, because at least we're practicing reading and we're practicing using the English language on a regular, consistent basis. Whereas a lot of times we completely outsource mathematics education to the school, which is a
Mm,
problem. And I don't say that to as a really, I don't really say that as a critique of parents, because this is what we've been taught to do. This is how we've been
right.
conditioned. Like, we're actually following instructions by completely outsourcing math education to the school, because that's all we know. That's what our parents did. That's what our grandparents did, their parents, whoever, right? But what I'm saying is, like, there has to be a paradigm shift where we say, okay, we're going to take more ownership of the mathematics education as well, and practice doing math in the house, in the car, walking down the street with our children. So when they do go to school and they see these different topics, they're not constantly being overwhelmed. Like, wow, I've never seen this before. Like, how do I do this? Right. There at least will be some more familiarity, So those are some of the things I definitely think like we got to be doing in the summer. And like, again, with another sports analogy, like, champions are made in the off season. So if you think like, summer break, like it's the time to chill, like, nah, it's not the time to chill. You got to be in summer programs. And if you're not in summer programs, you got to be practicing math. You got to be on them, the math YouTube channels. Matter of fact, I'm gonna plug my YouTube channel. You got to be on my YouTube channel, all this math, just watching videos and practicing. And also another thing for parents, don't send your child to the resources, bring them to the resources, right? That's different, right? It's different. Don't just send the link to their phone and just say, look at this, or like pull it up on the tablet or whatever. Like, sit down with them and engage with it as well. And what I would offer too for parents is, a lot of parents do have their own anxiety that they may be embarrassed about around math. And maybe they were uncomfortable when they were in school, in middle school or in high school, and with math. At some point, we got to get over that. We got to figure out how to get over that and take steps to get over that for the benefit of our children, our nieces, our nephews, and our grandchildren. We have to do that. That is mandatory, because a lot of our children, I can remember one summer I took it was a summer program I did in, at the Maryland Science Center down in Baltimore at the Inner Harbor, and it was on astronomy. But the thing about this program that was unique was you had to do it along with a parent. So every child that was in, I think I was in like fourth or fifth grade, you had to do it with a parent. So my dad came with me. So we learned in astronomy. We were sitting in the planetarium, learning about the constellations and Orion's belt and all that type stuff. And we learned about different like telescopes and everything. So, and what it did for me was like seeing him being engaged and caring about it. It made me care about it more, right? And it made me want to like really be more engaged. I mean, I was engaged already, but then like, oh, like wow, like my dad is here, and he was here like every day for the program. I don't know if it was 2 or 3 weeks, but we was there Monday through Friday, like every day in the summer. And that added to the buy-in. So a lot of times with parents, we want to like send our children to this, or give them this resource for some things. Like when I tell parents of young people, very young students that are practicing their multiplication facts, I'm like, your child should definitely know their multiplication facts, right? So print out some blank. One of the things you can do is print out blank multiplication table templates and have your child complete them. But I say, but not only that, print out 2 of them, because you should do one. You do one
Come
while
on
they do
now.
one. You fill it out, they fill it out, and then y'all can have like a friendly competition, right? Y'all can sit there and race, so you can figure it out first. Because a lot of us as adults don't have our multiplication facts memorized, right?
Mm,
So it's never too late. It's never too late. I know a lot of us may be embarrassed. Maybe like, I don't know this. I don't want my child to, I don't want my child to know I don't know my multiplication fact, because that might, compromise my authority in the household. Like, you got to get over that. You got to deal with that. But because what I'm saying is like, it's gonna help your child, be motivated, because they're like,
yeah.
wow, like, my mom cares about this, my dad cares about this, my grandmom, my grandpa, my uncle, my aunt, they care about this, so I should care about it too. you know?
And it's a great way to model how to get through something that you don't know how to do well. Because a lot of times I notice with children, they do, probably generalizing, but there are children that don't have grit or perseverance. If something is hard, they quit and be like, forget it. But it's more powerful to see, oh, my mom, dad, caregiver, whoever can't do this, but they're sitting here working through it because there are a lot of things. I'll tell you, like today, I was driving and I was going over a contract. Like I was telling my sons about this contract I got. And I was telling them about this, essentially now that I have doctor in front of my name, so on my contracts, the money has gone up. So I was
Congratulations.
saying, well, thanks.
Yeah.
And I was saying, like, I was getting paid this for this, and now I'm getting paid this. And I was like, I don't have time to do the math right now. But and my son sat there and started calculating the difference of what I was making. And he's like, oh, mom, that's a X amount of increase,
Right. Right.
this percent. And I was like, John, I'm like, whoa, like you. And I think about, like, to your point, some of the things that you talked about of like being like an example of trying to practice math as you're going, because every single example that you gave, I thought about a literacy component that goes with that. So like in the store, because I'm a gardener, so I have my kids
Okay.
look at the nutritional stuff for other reasons. But sometimes I would have them add stuff up in the store, like we're guesstimating, and then we'll have a conversation. So, for example, sometimes, like to your point, we eat junk food sometimes,
Hmm.
but sometimes we eat junk food because it's cheaper.
Hmm.
And so I'll have a conversation with my boys about, well, this food was high fructose corn syrup in it. It's $2 cheaper. This one is more expensive. Like, which one should we choose? And so they have to rationalize and explain, like, which one should they do? And some people are like, why are you having your kids explain things? But I said, it's not just about them being able to read regular book text, it's also being able to take in information. And I think people are more comfortable with reading because if you have some type of literacy, you have to read every single day to get through your life, whether
Hmm.
you're reading the signs when you're driving. So people are more comfortable, but when it comes to math, they're uncomfortable. And I realized, like, the math that my kid did in the back of the car, I could not do it as fast. And he did it in his head. I couldn't do it as fast. And I have to, like, just be humble enough to be like, I can't do this as fast as I
Right.
used to
Right.
because I'm not doing this. And it's okay for that to happen as well. I mean, I also appreciated how you talked about how we need to learn, because sometimes we don't have the skills. And when I first came across Akil, so I'm gonna tell y'all, I was like, he was like parents too. I was like, what? Because most times people are making stuff for kids, and it's just about the kids. But I liked how he said, no, this is for everybody. Everybody can get their math up. So I'm really encouraging y'all to get the book, and then the second book comes out in the summer, to really follow the resources because it is, he breaks it down in a way that anybody can comprehend. And if you had a teacher that didn't teach math in a way that you could take in, I think how Akil does it. And I think he reached back and grabbed on. So I'm gonna let him talk a little bit about his what he grabbed.
Yeah, because well, to your point about my comment on educating the parents as well, it reminds me of the late scholar, activist, psychologist, Dr. Nathan Hare, and his wife, who was one of his partners who worked with him, one of his intellectual partners, Dr. Julia Hare, who passed away maybe a few years ago. But Dr. Nathan Hare, I want to shout him out because he just made transition on June the 10th, so 2 days ago. But one of his books is The Miseducation of the Black Child, and on it the subtitle is The Hair Plan: Educate Every Black Man, Woman, and Child. So the work that we really have to do is, like, it's community work, and we're really trying to educate the whole family. I noticed also, like, that, I noticed as well, like, a lot of resources are, like, specifically targeting just children, and as if, like, the parents get left out, because even, and I think that's a reason for a lot of the frustration that a lot of parents have with the so-called new math, is that school district goes out, buys a brand new curriculum. Now they're teaching math this way, in a way that the parents didn't learn 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And there's not an emphasis or resources being put toward, teaching the parents in these new methods of instruction so that they can help with the homework. But then there's a criticism of the parents for not helping children with the homework. But a lot of parents, but I also think that plays into a lot of negative propaganda about the Black community. and this so-called black pathology that a lot of us buy into, as if black parents don't care about education, black parents don't care about their children that much, and that's the reason that they're not helping with homework. Where I would offer that most black parents, if they're not helping with homework, is because they don't know how to do the homework themselves. And then so that's why I'm like, again, it goes back to resources. It's like, well, if black parents knew how to do the homework, then they would help with the homework. So somebody's got to do the work of teaching black parents how to do the homework, you know? And I know that sometimes there's shame involved with not knowing how to help with the homework, but there shouldn't be, because there are a lot of math teachers that really don't understand these new
Woo!
curricula, and, these new
Stepping on some
methods
toes there.
of teaching, and I mean, again, it's not that they're unintelligent people.
Right.
They themselves haven't been trained. They haven't been trained properly. And a lot of them don't have a strong math background themselves. And a lot of them also, they like the idea of being a teacher. They want to make a positive impact on their community. They want to help people. They like working with children, but they themselves may have always had their own anxiety and their own significant deficiencies with mathematics that were never addressed properly. But then they get into the classroom, and then they can't really they can't be as effective because they haven't addressed their own deficiencies in mathematics. So it's a lot of work to be done. And again, but it goes back to resources. So, I'm gonna plug my YouTube channel again, because my YouTube channel is a resource for children to understand their math homework, for parents to understand math homework. It's also a resource teachers, for teachers to, gain insights on instructional methods and instructional practices, and how to think about, like, when they're explaining something, especially like when I'm doing the videos and I got my daughter in there, I got Asada in there, and I'm teaching her things, and I'm trying to model, like, listen, this is how I would teach this to my child, and I love my child. So, I'm not gonna, cut no corners or nothing like that. Like,
Mhm.
I'm showing you, like, the reality of, like, this is really how I do this, or even if my youngest son, Kwame, who's 5, I'm going over some things with him, so it's all, I think it's all about resources, not only resources, but creating the creation of resources, but then the marketing and the promotion of resources, and making sure people know that the resources are out there, and then the resources are comfortable to use and palatable. So yeah, so I think we definitely have to, educate everybody, like the whole family, the whole community, the aunties, the uncles, basically anybody that shows up for your prom send off, they should know how to help you with your math homework. That's my goal. That's how I want us to be in our community. If you show up for the cookout, any of your elders that show up for the cookout, they should be able to help you with your math homework. And that's why I'm like, listen, and I want to teach y'all. I want y'all to be able to learn it. So anybody, your favorite uncle, your favorite aunt, your grandmom, your grandpa, whoever, like, they should be able to help you with your math homework. And because it's so often children, like, need help with homework, need help with projects and math, and it's like they be like, who can I call? I don't know
Yeah.
nobody in my family that can help.
The community aspect. And I think that's the thing that is lost here in America sometimes, that community aspect. You still have people with this mindset of, like, this is my home, and it's not that wraparound of family. And I've had to do a lot of work even with my own family to say, like, I need more than you to send over gifts for Christmas or whatever holiday. I need you to show up for these things. I need you to help with these things. And some of them, I mean, some of the conversations I've had, like, why would I do that? Like, why would I support that? And then they'll go back to that. That's not what I had. They got figured it out. And I'm just like, no, we can't have that mindset, because if we keep doing the things the same way, our children aren't going to get better. But I also liked how you talked about not just giving a kid a resource, like bringing it to them, because anytime I ask my kids typically to do something, I go do it. A few years ago, one of my sons, when they were small, because there's no parenting handbook, the kid just shows up and you still try to figure this parenting thing out. So I'm like, okay, I can't swim. I'm gonna take my boys to the baby swim class. My one son just had the blues. We kept doing this over and over. The following when he got older, and my husband, he can swim. He can swim very well, and I cannot swim. So I was like, we gonna do swim classes together. And let me tell you, it was hard. It was embarrassing. I couldn't do the stuff. And then the teacher came to me one day and was like, Mrs. Barnes, we're gonna need to separate y'all out. And I still wasn't comprehending what this lady was trying to say. She's like, your sons are progressing further than you, and you need to stay in this remedial swim class and get some more help. And what was powerful about that is that my kids got to literally see me struggle in something and see, like, hey, if mom can't do this, I can still do this. And sometimes we are scared to do whatever it is with our kids, whether it's math, whether it's reading, because we are afraid that our kids will look at us and then less than. And normally it humanizes us, and we are not seen like these, parent overlords. Recently we were in DC. We went down to the MLK monument, and I said, let's walk around, look at all Dr. King's quotes, because they're all over the place. I said, take one quote and explain to me how that, why that connects to you. And one of my sons, and I actually joked with Sharif El-Mekki, who is a dope educator in Philly, on Twitter, about the fact, can we both talk about the fact that we are teachers at heart? So we're always finding these teachable moments in our kids. And my son was like, Mom, you trying to make me verbally do an essay right now? Yep. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Tell me your reasoning, give me some supporting details. And then I did it, and then I had my husband do it. And my husband will tell you he's in technology. So the math, the STEM, science, that's him. That's not his strong suit. But he's like, okay, your mom gonna want me to put some reasons on here. So let me give you some reasons for why I chose this quote. And so just kind of doing those different things is really, really helpful. So if we're looking at a typical summer week, Monday through Friday, what do you think a day should look like for families? Because I know you gave the real life activities, but if you were if you did this one thing or these two things this summer, in addition to going to your channel, doing it in the person day by day in the real world, what things are important to you as a math teacher that you would like to see? And I know that's probably one thing, two things.
Man, I love this question. I love this question. I'm foaming at the mouth to answer this question. But it depends on the age. It depends on the age of the children. And it depends
so let's start with, how about we start with our youngins? So K2, then we'll work our way up.
K-2. So I would like to see y'all working on addition and subtraction facts on a daily basis. And that's another thing too, consistency. Consistency is key. Consistency is the key. I think that's where a lot of people lose out. But that's with anything. I mean, going to the gym, working out, the consistency, and even if you fall off, and then some people say, well, I need to get back to that. And they'd be like, well, nah, I've been going for too long, so now I can't get back at it. Nah, get back at it. Start over again, because even that itself is a form of consistency, because if you look at it long term, then it looks like, okay, it might appear that you were more consistent than it seems. But yeah, K-2, practicing addition facts, and subtraction facts, practicing counting, and then once the addition facts from 1 through 20 are understood and memorized, right, and the subtraction facts, then get into some multiplication. I also want people to think about not relying on the school as I guess as a marker for what level your child should be at. So if your child is 5 and you would say, okay, my child is 5 and they're in kindergarten, so therefore they should be doing kindergarten work. I want us to get away from that. I want that to be the minimum, right? I want what the school distinction or the school level to be the minimum. I want us to aim for because I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking when I was in 5th grade, I was on a quote unquote 8th grade reading level. I don't really know what that means. I think that seems kind of arbitrary because I guess it's what a typical 8th grader would be reading at level they would be reading at.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder about how many of us are on are three grade levels ahead in terms of math. But I think that should be a goal. So if your child is, in kindergarten, maybe they should be, maybe you should have a goal as a parent, for your child to be, in a 2nd or 3rd grade math level, so to speak. And also, I mean, that's significant too, just that's that type of agency. We're not used to having that type and level of agency where we decide as parents, what I want my child to be learning. Again, because we've been conditioned to just outsource, send them to school, sign them up, get them registered, let the school handle all that, let the principal handle all that, let the content team handle all that, let the math teacher handle all that. what we have to start doing, especially in this day and age with technology being the way it is and the way the world is changing, we have to become more proactive as parents. And we got to like really assert ourselves more. And we got to like basically have some ego. We got to have some more ego where we feel like, listen, this is my child and I know what's best for my child, you know?
Yeah, it's like we're like summer program directors, and we get the autonomy to design the program however we
Yeah.
want to. And to your point about the reading level, um, a lot of times schools they just kind of cut you off, because one of the things I had to do when my kids were in elementary school, they were always reading above. And I'll tell you how I started this, because people said, well, I can't teach my kids phonics. I would drive them to the little daycare on my way to my teaching job, and I would use this program called Preschool Prep. It's a DVD series. I think it's now online, but back when I had my kids, it was on DVD. I bought one of those $50 little player with two screens and had it strapped to the back of my seats, and it will play the letter sounds. And then we moved to blends, and they had a numbers things, and they would listen to that on the way back and forth to daycare. So by the time they're 3 and I'm actually teaching them how to read the codable books, I didn't have to teach anything because they learned this on the way to and from daycare. So that's like 15 minutes there, 15 minutes back, 30 minutes every single day. And all I had to do was make sure I hit the play button before I started driving my car. And so fast forward, now they're in school and they're ahead. And the library had banned them from checking out books that were above their grade level at their elementary school. So I, being who I am, was like, oh, hey, that's not going to fly for me, because my kids don't want to read these books. They want to read the books that I buy them. And so they had to permit my kids, because they were like, the reasoning was, well, if they read the books that the fourth and fifth graders reading, what will the fourth and fifth graders reading? And I'm like, that sounds like a buy more books issue. That don't sound like a me, my kid issue. So I did get that permitted. But to your point, if your kid is mastering addition and subtraction and they're ready for something else, go ahead and expose them and let them practice that. You don't have to stop them. And also, there's a misnomer that the school won't stop them. They will. Because sometimes the teachers don't have the strategy. They're like, I teach second grade. I don't know what to do for them past second grade. Right. They should, because licenses are multiple years, but that's a whole other conversation for another time. They're supposed to know what to do for multiple grades, but sometimes they don't. So we got K through 2. What about the people that got third graders through fifth graders or sixth graders? Because sixth graders have that tricky age where it could be in elementary school, it could be in middle school. So if you got third grade through sixth grade, that's elementary.
All right, I'm gonna say something that a lot of people got upset with, and I'm glad they got upset with it. I was on the Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast with Shana Terrell. Shout out to her. Is that if your child is in third grade and they don't have the multiplication facts memorized from at least from 1 times 1 through 12 times 12, then as a parent you should be very concerned. You should be worried, but you should use that worry and that concern to motivate you to make sure that they have get those multiplication facts memorized as soon as possible. Now, what I also want to be clear, in case I decide to clip this up and put this out on the internet and then it goes viral too, is that what I'm saying in terms of memorization is memorization should be the end result, right? Your child should also understand conceptually why, 8 times 9 is 72, right? The relationship between 8 times 9 being 72 and also adding up 8 9 times, or flipping it around using a commutative property, adding up 9 8 times. Why that's 72? Or saying, well, 4 times 9, twice is the same thing as 8 times 9. All those types of things. Or even like, using the distributive property, all these types of things and all these little games that we play, to increase number sense, in mathematics and whatnot, right? That's important as well. But the end result is that your child's going to know at some point 8 times 9 is 72. You know what I'm saying? They just going to hear it. Like I say, listen, if you as a child, you recognize what your mom looks like. So when you see your mom, you're like, oh, that's my mom, right? Mm-hmm. You should, or you hear your mom's voice. You're like, oh, that's my mom calling me. You should be just as familiar when you see 8 times 9 written on a board, 72. When you hear somebody say 8 times 9, you should think 72, right? And that should be your level of fluency for all the multiplication facts, because the multiplication facts really are so foundational. And a lot of times we take that for granted. They're so foundational, because then from the multiplication facts, then we get to the division facts, since division is just the converse of multiplication. And then we start talking about factors. We start talking about multiples. We start dealing with fractions. We start talking about reducing fractions and all these different things that require you to understand, the relationships between numbers when you're multiplying. So for grades like 3 through 6, make sure they know their multiplication facts, their division facts. Make sure they are fluent with fractions. So many students hate fractions. They're scared of fractions. They don't want to see a fraction. They don't want to deal with fractions. Your
So
child,
how are you fluent with fraction? Can you tell us what that means? So if I'm a parent and you say fluent with fraction, what am I supposed to be? What does that mean? What should I be doing?
that's an excellent question. So fluent with fractions means, well, first, let me back up because I think this is missed out in a lot of instruction around fractions. Just having a conceptual understanding of what a fraction is and what those numbers even mean, right? Because somebody could say 3/5, right? You might be able to write it down, put the three on top, put the three, draw the horizontal bar, and put the 5 underneath. But what does that even mean? What does 3/5 mean? If you ask like the average person, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you. For a long time, I wouldn't be able to tell you. Now, was I good with, arithmetic with fractions? I was excellent with it, but could I really tell you, have a intelligent conversation with you about like what 3/5 means? For a long time, I couldn't. Not until I started teaching Common Core math methods classes at LaSalle and then at Cheney, right? Where I had to really learn conceptually the foundation of, different math topics that I never really learned when I was young, because I was taught to understand algorithms, memorize steps and processes, and just get to the answer and then going about your business. That's how I was taught. But 3/5 is like, we look at the denominator. And again, we got to understand the math vocabulary. What is a denominator? It's the number on the bottom. What is the numerator? The number on top, right? So what does that 5 mean? That 5 means that we took an object and we divided it up into 5 equal pieces. So the denominator is how many equal pieces we have. And what does the numerator mean? That's out of those pieces in the bottom from the denominator, that's how many pieces we care about. So we care about 3 of those pieces. And also you can get visual. Make sure, children like to draw things. I recommend having children draw fractions, draw what the fraction looks like. So they always have a visual, you know? So it's written form and then visual form, right? A picture, and that's something that can be relaxing, kind of like coloring in a coloring book, just drawing a picture, right? So understanding conceptually what a fraction is, that's part of fraction fluency. Also knowing how to add fractions, right? How to add fractions together, and also understanding, why do we need common denominators? Understanding why, right? So like you said earlier, like, you challenge your children to like explain why this is this, or like why this is a better buy than this, why this is more economical. It's important for children to, like, if they're in terms of understanding math, be able to explain why they think this. How come you can't just do 3/5 plus 2/3 and just add the 5 and the 3? Add the denominators together, because it would be the same thing. One way to look at it is, it would be the same thing as adding dollars and pesos, right? $5 plus 3 pesos is not $8. $5 plus 3 pesos is not 8 pesos. They're different denominations of money. So again, back to the vocabulary. Denominator is the bottom number. The denominator tells you like the units. It's almost like if I'm 250 pounds. Pounds is my denomination. I'm 250 of them. So 250 is like my numerator. Pounds is like my denominator. It's similar to my denomination, right? So that's why I can't just say like, well, this person is 250 pounds. This person over here is 180 kilograms. I can't just add 250 and 180. It's not the same terms. It's not the same denomination. So that's why we have to find what we call a common denominator. So, back to the original example, like 3/5 and 2/3. And if you're watching this, don't feel bad if you don't fully understand it, because a lot of us are visual learners, like I am, right? This only makes sense to me as I talk through it, because I've done this so much. But if this was my first time hearing this, I would need to see a visual. I would need to see it written on the screen. But you can go to my channel. I got plenty of videos where I go over problems like this. But anyway, 3/5 plus 2/3, I got fifths and I got thirds. So I say, okay, but I got fifths and I got thirds. But the least common multiple between 5 and 3 is 15. So I could break the fifths and the thirds down into 15ths. That's one option. I could do that. Now I got 15ths. Now I can add them together, right? But I can't add them together when they're not the same, right? Another thing that children got to understand is, like, you don't add the denominator or subtract the denominators, because that would be like saying, like, if I have $5 and then I get $2, I have $7. I don't have $7. I don't add the word dollars from the first amount to the word dollars from the second amount. Same thing with adding fractions. You don't add the denominator from the first fraction to the denominator in the second fraction. You don't do that. That wouldn't make sense. Just like $5 plus $2 is just $7 written one time, not $7 plus dollars, right? So it's a similar concept. So fluency with fractions is first, for me, understanding the concept of a fraction. Whenever you see a fraction, what does that even mean, right? Knowing how to add them together, knowing how to subtract fractions, knowing how to multiply fractions, knowing how to divide fractions, right? Also knowing how to reduce fractions. And what does that mean? And what does it look like? Right? Because again, and that's where you get into like math as like a defense mechanism, as a tool and a weapon. Because if you can't reduce fractions and figure out like equivalent fractions, people will take advantage of you, because you might end up in a situation where somebody will tell you like, well, 3/4 of this pizza costs this much, but if I cut it into 12 slices and I give you 9 of them, I'm gonna charge you more. It's like, why are you charging me more? It's the same amount of pizza. You charging me because of the effort you took to like slice it up more times? Like, really? Like that was that much more work? Like that's what you charged me for? But as a child, if you don't know that 9/12 and 3/4 are the same amount, they're equivalent fractions, somebody will tell you that and you'll be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then you'll be thinking like, because you want to trust people, right? So you'll try to rationalize it in your mind, like, okay, why is he charging me more? Why is she charging me more? Okay, that must be because, well, 9 is bigger than 3 and 12 is bigger than 4. So sure, that makes sense. Not realizing that those are equivalent fractions. It's like the school teacher trick. It's like, okay, we have a party. It's the end of the school year. We buy the large pizzas. The large pizzas are cut into 8 slices. But the children don't need slices that big anyway. So we slice in every slice gets sliced in half. So now the 8 slice pizza turned into a 16 slice pizza. So now it seems like we have more pizza. It's the same amount of pizza, but the slices are just smaller, right? That's a mathematical activity.
Yeah, and a
Right?
lot of these that talking about fact fluency are things that you can just do. So last night, while I was in DC, my son bought 2 cookbooks. He's been into cooking, and I've been cooking with my kids since they were 5. But now it's more like we want to pick stuff that you don't cook. So last night he cooked Nigerian red stew. It was very good. But when he was cooking, I may not have had all the things. So he's like, it calls for this. So he had to add fractions together to get the amount he needed, because maybe I didn't have the teaspoon or the tablespoon. And then sometimes when my kids were younger, which would make them so irritated with me, especially when we were making cookies, I'm like, we're going to double this recipe, but we can't double it until we figure out what the fractions are.
Right.
And they would just be like, why can't we just make cookies? We're going to make cookies, but we're going to double this recipe. And I have boys and they eat a lot, so we need to double recipes. So there's just so many application. And then in the store, because my boys now, they're like, Mom, that's not even a deal, because a lot of times I buy like family sizes of stuff, and they're like, Mom, don't buy the family size. You can buy 3 boxes of this same thing, and that's actually cheaper than buying the family size. And so you have to actually start looking at the math. So the grocery store, and it will make your grocery trip longer, and you have to be a strong soldier to not to get your kids to put extra crap in the cart when you're trying to teach. But just taking those time to explain that practical stuff to them, because that is straight up math, trying to figure out, is this actually equivalent? Did I actually really get a deal on this family size? Because a lot of times you would surprised, believe it or not, you might be cheaper just buying the multiple individual boxes in the big family size, because you're actually, I don't know, paying more to put it all in one big box, or whatnot.
And I would say to that point, like, in terms of, it making the grocery trip longer, it's an investment. It's an investment of time and effort on the front end, because it's not going to always be that long. Because once your children become acclimated and they become accustomed to like calculating unit prices, and then they can do it mentally using mental math, like it's going to be quick. They're going to be able to just do it. And again, you're teaching them math, you're becoming their primary educator, like in a safe space, in a comfortable space. So when they're responsible for, those standards, when they're in a math classroom in a school, it's not going to be as hard for them. They're just going to be practicing something that they already know, which is what you want. You want like school. Like I have this goal in our community, since unless we control the schools as a community and as Black people. It's something that H. Rap Brown, Jamil Alameen, shout out to him. He's a political prisoner still to this day. Ran with Kwame Ture in the 60s and was in SNCC and whatnot. Did a lot of work for our people. One of his quotes was, any institution that you don't control can be used as a weapon against you. And oftentimes the public schools, charter schools, private schools, if we don't control them, they use as weapons against us. So if these spaces are being used as weapons against us, we should at least, I think that if our children have to go to them, because there are a lot of factors in play, right?
Right.
The school should be a space for practice, not a space for primary education. But in order for it to be a space for practice, that means that some other space has to be a place for primary education. So that means the community has to become the space for primary education, the household, the neighborhood, the block, the corner, the rec center, wherever, space that we do control. So, but we have to know how to do that. We have to know how to offer that education. So again, that takes us back to the resources, and we got to actually like offer the resources, make them palatable, make them readily available. And parents have to have the confidence to be able to do that, for their children, you know.
So let's think about middle school. Middle school. What's your middle? I don't know if middle school and high school, when you would put them together or you would separate them out. So what would middle and or high school students be doing during the summer?
I mean, there's some overlap, but definitely algebra, the foundation in algebra, like knowing how to solve equations, solve linear equations. There are many types of equations, but let's say solving linear equations, like knowing how to solve for x or whatever your variable is. And there are many different types of equations. You got equations that got variables on both sides of the equal sign. You got equations that got, expressions inside parentheses. You got equations that's got fractions for the coefficients. Like just knowing how to like solve any type of equation, no matter how it's set up, is like so important and so foundational.
And I'm guessing on your resources, because the internet loves those questions with the parentheses and brackets in it. I'm sure you explain some of those, because I know there's probably some grown-ups watching who may want to know how to solve those type of problems as well.
So you might be talking about the order of operations questions where people use PEMDAS. Yeah. So I just recorded a video last week actually that I think everybody should take a look at. And one of the things I emphasize is that PEMDAS is a problem. And a lot of math teachers will attest to this. A lot of math teachers don't like PEMDAS. Some people are a little more aggressive, have a lot more vitriol than I do for PEMDAS. But I understand where it comes from, because people learn PEMDAS and don't learn the order of operations. So I want to be very clear on here and echo something that I've already said, which is that PEMDAS is a mnemonic device which is meant to help you to recall or, to remember what the actual order of operations is. The order of operations has a lot more details than just the acronym PEMDAS does. But when you just learn PEMDAS, you may fail to recover those details. For example, in PEMDAS, the M is before the D. So logically, you would think that, okay, M stands for multiplication, D stands for division. Since the M is before the D in PEMDAS, that means that I should always, in every circumstance, multiply before I divide. That is absolutely and unequivocally wrong. You don't always multiply before you divide. But again, the detail that's lacking from the mnemonic device is that you multiply or divide depending upon which operation comes first as you read the problem from left to right. So PEMDAS is supposed to remind you of that long sentence I just verbalized. It's supposed to remind you of that. The problem is that people didn't learn that long sentence I just verbalized. They learned PEMDAS, or maybe they did learn that once upon a time, but forgot it and only remembered PEMDAS, right? So PEMDAS is supposed to refer you back to the longer, larger, more robust, comprehensive explanation. But for some people, it doesn't. And then that's why you end up with people on Instagram and on Facebook arguing in the comments talking about, nah, y'all need to go back to school, or this, that new math. Like, bro, it's not new math. It's always been like that. You're missing the detail. Like, you're leaving out the details, right?
So for example, I'm going to go out here on a limb to make sure I heard what you said correctly. As you're reading from left to right, if division comes up first, as you're reading from left to right, you're supposed to do the division before you do the multiplication.
Yes. So I what I started doing a couple years ago is I started writing this hashtag PEMORDAS. PEMORDAS. Or you can change it. It could be PEMDAS or PEDMAS, right? Either way, but people have to understand it. Now, it's really it's the same thing applies with addition and subtraction, right? However, with addition and subtraction, the difference is this. If you are mindful of the signage in the problem, whether you add or subtract first, it won't affect the final answer. It won't affect the final answer. But with multiplication and division, if you multiply first, you'll get a certain answer. If you divide first, you'll get a different answer. So that's where the problems come into. That's where the issues arise. Another thing with the order of operations is understanding, and this is like a language issue, another overlap with literacy. So we understand how like different words mean different things in different contexts, right? A parentheses can mean one thing in a math problem. It can be a grouping symbol meant to group terms together. In another context, a parentheses can just be there to separate numbers or terms to indicate that you need to multiply them together. Sometimes people see a parentheses and they don't distinguish or differentiate between, okay, what does this parenthesis mean? Is this being used as a grouping symbol or is it being used as a multiplication symbol? So when they see parentheses, they think, oh, PEMDAS, the P stands for parentheses. So whenever I see a parentheses, I know I'm doing that first. Another source of confusion. No, that parentheses is not that use of the parentheses is not being used as a grouping symbol. So no, we're not doing that first. So because what they'll do is they'll say, oh, well, this parentheses means multiplication, and I remember that the P is first in PEMDAS, so that means that I got to multiply first before I do anything else because that's PEMDAS. Like, nah, bro, like that's not how that works. But again, but that's a convention, right? It's similar to the English language. Like we have to know, okay, well, this means this in this context, but the same exact thing means something different in a different context. And those are that's part of understanding the language of math, right? It's part of understanding the language of math, which comes from, you know, not taking off for the summer, not taking breaks, and practicing, during the summer months when your children are not in school every day, right? Just doing a lot of problems and getting a lot of practice, all because it's a lot of like math is a language in and of itself, and it's a lot of details to it, and it's a lot of ways to get jammed up and make mistakes. And real quick, I just want to say too that something I've had to work on and kind of develop is to begin to embrace the mistakes. Because the mistakes are teachable moments and they're learning opportunities. And I think that a lot of us, we went to school and we were in classrooms where we were shamed for making mistakes as a motivational tool, similar to the way we might have been shamed when we were athletes playing sports. We might have been shamed by our coaches, a certain way. But so we don't want to make mistakes, and then when we do make mistakes, we kind of want to hide it. But the mistakes is what you can really learn from, right? Like I can, as a teacher, I can help you. Like if you make a mistake, we can learn from that. Like let's rock with that. Let's zero in on like, well, why'd you make the mistake? Like what was the mistake? Like a right answer is cool. That's great. That may show proficiency and some type of mastery, but the correct answer doesn't help me in terms of teaching you as much as the mistake does. So as parents and as children, I don't want us to be ashamed of the mistakes in math class, because we gotta well, let me be clear about that. I tell students this also. Some mistakes are allowable and some are unallowable. I do say that, because some things are very basic, and some mistakes can be attributed to just carelessness, just plain flat out carelessness. And if you're being careless, then that's a problem. That's another issue. But I do want us to embrace like mistakes that we make when we're not being careless, we're being focused. We are attempting to arrive at the correct answer, and we're using our notes and we're referencing our notes and we're trying to get to the correct answer, and we're working through, we're struggling through the problem sometimes. We can really, that's mistakes can be beneficial, so we got to like lean into the mistakes.
Well, as we're wrapping up this hour here, do you have any final thoughts for the viewers before we come to a close?
Yeah, just understand like math is a language and embrace it, and and work with your children, and take the necessary steps to become the primary math educator in your child's life, because what you have to understand is that schools are not equipped to fully educate your child in terms of mathematics. And it's not because the teachers are necessarily bad teachers or ill-equipped. It's the environment. You have a certain amount of time. Like imagine if you're a parent watching this podcast, and we've been on here for an hour, and I come on here and I introduce a topic to you that you've never seen before a day in your life, and I'm like, listen, you got to fully understand this by the end of this hour. And I started 60 minutes ago, and you got to fully understand it by the end of this hour. And after that, we going on to another topic, when we do this podcast again tomorrow, right? That's how school is, right? So if your child is like relying only on school, right, because of the time constraints And because of the pressures of standardized testing, that's really how school is, in many spaces and in many cases. So if your child don't get it in the time that's allotted, they just not going to get it. So what's the alternative? The alternative is they have to either be prepared for it ahead of time in another space, whether it be in a household or in a program somewhere on a Saturday or wherever, after school or whatever, or they have to be what's being offered in the classroom has to be supplemented after school, and parents, we as parents, and I'm a parent too, that's why I say we as parents have to do more and have to do a better job of being advocates for our children and helping to develop them into math scholars. And there are resources available, and because it's much more than just telling parents, y'all need to do this, y'all need to do that, y'all
Right.
not doing enough. Like, you got to give people resources, you know now, once I lead you to the water, now you got to drink. You got to drink. That's the reality. We're all adults here. But
And the water we want y'all to be led to is go on to YouTube. Search up All This Math. Akil posts on Facebook and Instagram,
Mhm.
and he and I are both on the trying to use TikTok more effectively journey, because
Yeah,
I'm at the age where learning another form of social media, my brain, and it's a lot.
yeah.
But he's definitely on Instagram, Facebook, posting great stuff all the time. He has the book that you can buy online, and then the second volume 2 is coming out at the end of this summer. So definitely either search up his name, Akil Parker, or search All This Math, and you will come across all of his resources. So Akil, thanks for joining us on our 75th episode, and of course, I will probably have you back again, because this conversation is a conversation that has so many areas, so many facets to it. And this is a conversation that we must continue to have. So thanks again for being here.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you. Keep up your work.